Global order is unraveling. America is retreating, becoming more siloed. And we have aggressors that are joining forces together, Russia, China, Iran, and so forth. And we are simply ill prepared for what's coming over the hill. And that's why I'm saying I think the British public would support increase in defence spending.
Let's get into some more of the vulgar politics of this with Tobias Ellwood, who regular listeners will know as a former Conservative Member of Parliament. More importantly, the chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee. Good afternoon, Mr. Ellwood.
Good afternoon to you.
Let's just start with...
Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Let's just start with what is happening in Paris. Disabuse me of my terrible cynicism. Tell me that this isn't just for show, so the Europeans can make themselves feel less left out.
It's less about what's going on the front line in Ukraine. It's actually more about the fact that you're now left with President Putin, the most powerful leader in Europe, more powerful than Stalin. And it's the Americans that have made it very clear at the Munich Security Conference that they are dialing back their security interests in Europe. And Europe itself has now got to look after its own security. So those countries that are there, the Baltics already get this. I know you had said, oh, why aren't they included? They're already spending 3-4% GDP. But next to the front line, they appreciate the threat. I'm afraid the rest of us are not acquainted with what's coming over the hill. And it's really interesting you discussing about members of parliament. And I say this with a bit of caution and respect, but most MPs are not briefed on the threats that are coming over the hill. Therefore, they may not be inclined to support increase in defence spending when there's so many other places to spend. If they were to get the classified briefings, if they were to be up to date with exactly what the threat picture is looking like, I'm sure that they would be then willing to play or support more increase in defence spending. Likewise, I think if the British public are now becoming more aware of just where Europe is going, of what America is now doing, and what we're left with in Ukraine, the British public will demand greater defence spending. If we leave it and nothing happens, we'll have an acute event. Something dramatic will happen. And then people will say, why on earth haven't we invested more? A war is now flaming up in Ukraine. It's not been put out. It's not been dealt with. A deal is being made. You were cynical about 1938. Here we are appeasing an aggressor once again, hoping that war will not spread. I mean, that is the wrong approach indeed.
I'm struck by your comparison of Putin to Stalin. You will know the famous remark attributed to Stalin, though probably never said it. He's supposed to have said to Churchill when they were discussing whether some particular policy might offend Polish Catholics, Stalin said to Churchill, well, how many divisions does the Pope have? I.e., this is really all about military power. Is that what the reality, that what the gathering in Europe, in Paris, I beg your pardon, is going to have to come to terms with?
We're going to have to come to terms with the fact that we've enjoyed 3 decades of relative peace since the end of the Cold War. Those days are over.
What Bill Clinton called a holiday from history.
Yes, exactly. Because actually history, you go back, even back to 1066, we're at war more unstable than it is stable. That is actually the norm. We've been fortunate, as you imply, over the last 3 decades. And a generation in the UK has grown up thinking this is the norm. It isn't. We have been very fortunate indeed. Global order is unraveling. America is retreating, becoming more siloed. And we have aggressors that are joining forces together, Russia, China, Iran, and so forth. And we are simply ill prepared for what's coming over the hill. And that's why I'm saying I think the British public would support increase in defence spending, recognizing that there is a symbiotic relationship between our economy and our security. If globalization, about half of our GDP is affected by international headwinds. We saw those with the great ships in Odessa, the other shipping routes in the Red Sea. We could easily have our own economy disrupted because of European security. To put this fire out, to support Ukraine and make sure that we work with our allies in Europe to fill the void that America, I'm afraid, is about to provide or about to leave.
Well, Mr. Keir Starmer's heading off to the United States, we gather, next week to talk to Mr. Trump. If you were advising him, what do you think he could say to Mr. Trump to persuade the Americans that the Europeans really deserve a seat at the table? Because at the moment, what's going to happen is the Americans and the Russians are going to reach a deal, and then they'll tell everybody else what they're supposed to do.
Yes, and that is not the way to go about it. Remember, Donald Trump did this once again. Many people perhaps have forgotten. He sent his team to Doha, I think in 2020, to strike a deal with the Taliban that excluded all the other NATO partners that were involved. They excluded the Afghan government as well. And we saw how that unraveled. And I think Biden ended up taking, the hit for it. Here we go again, making a deal with Putin, giving Putin credibility on the international stage, allowing Putin to claim some sort of victory back in Russia itself, rather than actually supporting Ukraine. And it's been said again and again, but worth repeating. We are giving the space for Putin to rearm, regroup, and do this all somewhere else again in another part of Europe. And that's the scale of the challenge that we face. And it won't just be military might. It'll be grey zone warfare. That's what I think 2025 will be remembered for, is the constant attacks, which are deniable, against our economy in so many ways, whether it's the breaking up of those the cables across the English Channel, or cyber attacks and so forth, or even assassinations as well, individual assassinations. That's the disruption we're going to get, the political discord that's going to be produced by Russia and, of course, backed by China as well.
Thank you.
We're moving into a new era of security, and that's why we've got to spend more on defence.
Tobias Ellwood, thank you so much. That was Tobias Ellwood, the former chair of the Defence Select Committee.